Far beyond the quiet edge of mapped space, there was a place where stars felt older and darker and less forgiving and yet. That place, a small, forgotten world, circled a dying sun, and the people on that world had learned how to survive by staying. Silent and staying small and hoping that no one remembered they were there, but hope is a fragile thing, and silence can only last so long, and on one long night. When the sky burned red with solar storms and the air tasted like rust, a single signal escaped the world and slipped into the endless dark, not loud, not proud, just desperate and tired and full of pain, and it carried. No flags and no code, just a simple truth that someone somewhere was suffering and needed help, and the galaxy was not meant to hear it, and most of it did not, but far away aboard a human ship drifting between stars, Captain Han Giwu felt the hum of the engines change and knew something was wrong before any alarm spoke, and Giwu was not a man who believed in fate. But he believed in listening, and when the signal reached the ship, it was like a whisper against his thoughts, and it made his chest feel heavy and cold, and he stood in the quiet bridge and watched the stars slide past and felt the weight of command pressed down on him, and around him the crew moved with calm, focused people like Park Sejin, who always tapped his fingers when nervous, and Lee Doyan, who stared at data like it might confess secrets if he waited long enough, and they were explorers, not soldiers sent to chart empty space and gather dust in numbers. And yet here was a voice crying out across the dark, and Jiwoo ordered the signal isolated and replayed, and the sound that came through was broken and weak, filled with static and fear, and it was not in any known language, but pain does not need translation, and the crew felt it in their bones. And Sejin swallowed hard, and Doyan looked away, and no one spoke, because they all understood the unspoken question of what now. And Giwu remembered stories from Earth about old oceans and sailors who followed distress lights into storms knowing they might not return, and he thought of home and of streets filled with noise and warmth and people who argued and laughed and lived freely, and he thought of how small this ship was compared to the vast galaxy and how easy it would be to ignore one signal and keep drifting, and he knew the official rules and the warnings about interference and unknown powers and the careful balance that kept humanity alive in a hostile universe, and still he could not order the engines to turn away. And when he finally spoke, his voice was steady but soft as he told the crew they would follow the signal and find its source, and no one argued, and no one smiled, and no one cheered, because this was not glory or adventure, it was responsibility. And as the ship adjusted course, the signal grew clearer, and fragments of meaning began to form images of chains and empty skies and cities built for others. And Mirakong, the ship's diplomatic officer, joined the bridge and listened with her eyes closed and tears on her cheeks, and she whispered that whoever sent this knew they would be heard and punished, and still they sent it. And Giwu felt anger rise in him, slow and deep and dangerous, and he wondered what kind of galaxy allowed such fear to exist. And as hours passed, the ship crossed into regions marked as restricted by old alien charts, and the stars here were dimmer, and the silence felt thicker, like it pressed against the hull. And Doyan reported faint energy signatures, not random, not natural, and Sajin muttered that someone was hiding something out here, and Jiwoo nodded because he already felt it, and he thought of humanity standing at the edge of a wider universe, still young, still underestimated, still carrying old scars from Earth and old lessons about cruelty and kindness, and he wondered if those lessons were about to be tested again. And the signal suddenly cut out, and the bridge went still, and for a moment Jiwoo feared they were too late. But then new data streamed in, showing a planet below, scarred and stripped and surrounded by massive structures that blocked the light of its sun. And Mira opened her eyes and said softly that this was no mining site, it was a prison world. And Jiwoo clenched his fists and ordered the ship closer, knowing that every step forward could draw attention from powers far greater than humanity, and yet stepping back felt impossible. And as they descended into orbit, they saw cities shaped like cages and fields, worked by exhausted figures and ships in the sky that watched and waited and never helped. And the distress signal flared once more, brief and fading, like a final breath, and Jiwoo felt something break inside him, and he knew that whatever happened next would change them all, and perhaps change the galaxy itself. And he wondered if the stars were watching, and if they would remember this moment. When a small human ship chose to listen, instead of turning away and deep inside. The ship, as engines thrummed and systems warmed and hearts raced, the crew understood that this was not just a mission but a line being crossed, a promise being made. That humanity would carry its humanity with it wherever it went, even into the darkest parts of space, and the ship moved. Silently above the wounded world, like a held breath, waiting for what would come next, and the story of fear and courage and consequence began to take shape, not in words or laws, but in choice, and the galaxy would feel that choice in time. Even if it did not yet know it, far from human space in the cold quiet between stars, the galaxy stretched vast and empty and full of rules and hierarchies that had lasted for centuries, and the humans had arrived. Unannounced, and the news traveled slowly at first through whispered channels and fragmented messages, because the galaxy did not know what to make of them and Captain. Hanju sat on the bridge of the exploration vessel, staring at the holographic map of the sectors beyond the outer frontier, and he could feel the weight of every unknown planet, every system that had been untouched by human eyes, and still he could not ignore the signal that had led them here, and he remembered the broken voice of the world below and the images of chained figures under alien structures, and he felt the cold knot of determination in his chest, and around him the crew moved in quiet focus, and Seijin was already scanning every transmission they could access for signs of recognition or warning, and Doyon was comparing energy signatures against the galactic database, trying to find patterns that might explain the strange architecture they had seen from orbit. And Mira Kong joined the bridge and leaned over the table and said softly that the aliens here would not welcome their presence, and Jiwoo nodded because he knew she was right, and he also knew that humanity did not come to conquer or to obey, it came because it could not turn away, and the stars outside the window glimmered in muted light, and the silence pressed against the ship as if testing their resolve, and Guo thought of home and of Earth with its crowded streets and the smell of rain on soil and the laughter of children, and he wished he could have shared this mission with people who understood that feeling of simple life, because the galaxy was vast and cruel and yet full of wonder, and the humans were small yet bold, and that contrast made them unpredictable and dangerous to those who had grown used to control. And the first contact came as a soft signal from a passing scout ship of the Galactic Coalition, a species Jiwoo had never seen before, their forms shifting and translucent like liquid light, and their voices carried in complex patterns that the human translation softer struggled to make sense of, and Mira listened intently and said that they were cautious observers warning humans to leave unknown space, and Jiwoo replied that leaving was not an option, and Sajin added that the coalition did not understand that humans did not follow rules, they made choices based on what was right or needed. And the scout ship lingered at the edge of detection, as if considering whether humans were a threat, and Kuwu could feel tension ripple through the crew like static electricity, and it was not fear, but awareness of the stakes, and the humans had learned to read such moments from each other, and their bond gave them strength, and soon the scout ship retreated, and reports came in from distant sensors that coalition ships were being dispatched to assess the anomaly of a human ship so far from known space, and Mira said that the coalition assumed humans were a primitive species and perhaps extinct, and Guwu smiled faintly because they were neither, and that misunderstanding was humanity's hidden advantage, and the humans watched the world below from orbit, and the signals from the surface were still faint and desperate, and Jiwoo ordered long-range scans to map the settlements and the cages and the machinery that hums day and night. And he thought about the people trapped, their living lives stripped of choice, and he felt a surge of sorrow and anger that mixed with determination, and Seijin reported energy fluctuations that indicated attempts at communication from the surface, but the coalition's monitoring systems were intercepting and corrupting the signals, and Doyon said quietly that someone down there was trying to reach anyone who could listen, and Jiwoo leaned back in his chair and felt the loneliness of space press around him, and he wondered if the galaxy had ever seen humans act without selfishness or fear, and the answer would come soon enough because humans did not wait for permission, they acted, and Myra asked if he considered the political implications of what they were doing, and Ji-woo said that yes he did, but morality had a voice louder than caution, and the crew nodded because they understood that humanity's strength lay not in fleets or weapons, but in courage and the will to act, even when the universe said no, and messages began to arrive from other corners of the galaxy. Fragments of rumors of humans entering coalition space, crossing forbidden boundaries, arriving at worlds no one remembered, and the coalition struggled to categorize them because humans did not fit their models, and Ji-woo watched the data with quiet pride and concern, and Mira said that the coalition feared what it did not control, and Ji-woo replied that humans did not seek to control, they sought to help, and that difference was like a spark in darkness. And as the hours passed, humans prepared for descent to the surface, planning to make contact with the oppressed species they had glimpsed from orbit, and the signal flared again, faint and intermittent, but unmistakable, and Sajin traced its origin to a small settlement, surrounded by high walls, and Doyen noted that the energy signature of the machines suggested surveillance. An oppression, and Ji-woo felt a weight settle on him because he knew they would be seen and assessed and judged, and Mira reminded him that they could still communicate from orbit if they were careful, and Ji-woo said that they could not wait and that they would not hide when lives depended on their courage, and the crew shared silent glances and nodded because they had trained for exploration and observation, but never for inaction when injustice screamed across the void and the ship adjusted. Of course, descending slowly toward the surface, and the sky of the world was gray and thick with dust. The sun barely shone through the haze, and the humans could see shapes moving in the distance, and the settlers hiding or forced to work, and Ji-woo felt a pang of sadness at the sight of them, and Mira said softly that they must be careful not to frighten them more than they already are, and Ji-woo whispered that sometimes courage is frightening to those who have never seen it, and as the humans prepared to make the first contact, the coalition dispatched a vessel closer to the system, a ship larger and more advanced, and Ji-woo and Mira watched the screens and felt the unspoken question of what would happen if humans made their presence known, and Sejin reported that the coalition ship's scans did not recognize the humans fully, and Doyen said that they would underestimate them as they always did, and Ji-woo thought about Earth's history. Humans underestimated again and again, and survived again and again because they listened to instincts that others dismissed as foolish, and as the surface settlement sent faint signals and hope, the human crew planned responses based on trust and observation, and kindness, not intimidation. And Mira considered how much courage it took for a species to act with empathy in a galaxy that had long forgotten it. And Ji-woo felt the same, and he remembered nights on Earth when he had held hands with friends and family and promised protection and safety, and he realized that this mission was a reflection of those promises magnified across light years, and the coalition vessel moved closer, sensing the anomaly of humans so far from home, and Ji-woo knew that the coming hours would define how the galaxy perceived humans for generations, and the humans below had no weapons, no alliances, no power except their lives and their hope, and the human crew had no guarantee of success except their principles, and the ship ascended through the gray sky, revealing rooftops and streets empty of normal life, and the humans saw the despair etched into the surfaces of buildings and the faint trails of those who dared escape only to be caught again, and Ji-woo felt a tightness in his chest. And he realized that all the calculations and scans and strategies in the universe could not capture the human heart when it decided to act for others, and Mira reminded him that fear and hope were intertwined here, and Ji-woo nodded because he understood that fear had kept these people silent, and hope had made a signal break through the darkness and reach across light years, and Sajin adjusted instruments to pick up more signals from the surface, and Doyen analyzed them to find patterns. And the humans began to communicate in simple ways, symbols, lights, flashes that meant I am here, I am alive, and they would listen to anyone who responded, and slowly shapes began to appear on the streets, small figures, looking up hesitantly, and the humans in the ship saw that the people below were watching and waiting, and Zhu felt a warmth in his chest that surprised him because in this cold star system there was connection and trust growing between species, and the coalition fleet slowed. As if puzzled by the humans below, and Mira said quietly that they cannot understand humans because humans act for reasons they cannot measure. And Wu smiled faintly and thought that perhaps that was the advantage they needed, and the ship hovered over the settlement and released signals that were calm, welcoming, careful not to frighten, and the humans on the streets hesitated, then moved closer, guided by the hope that had carried them across the void, and the stars seemed to hold their breath. As human voices carried gently through the air, and the crew felt the fragile miracle of trust being born, and Jiwoo looked at Mira and Sejin and Doyoon and the others and knew that for the first time the galaxy was seeing what humanity truly could be when it chose to act not for gain, not for glory, but simply because it was right, and the signal that had once been broken now had companions on the ground and in orbit and in the hearts of humans, and the story that began with a whisper in the dark was growing into a presence that the galaxy had never anticipated, and even as coalition ships circled and watched and calculated and predicted and failed to understand the humans below and above the stars, the people on the settlement began to feel a spark of something long denied, a spark that told them that they were not forgotten, and that perhaps there were beings in the universe who would act without expectation, without fear, and Jiwoo felt that spark too, and knew that whatever happened next, the galaxy would never be the same because humans had arrived. They had listened, and that simple act had shifted the balance in ways that even the oldest civilizations could not yet see, and the hours passed slowly as humans reached out to humans, and the settlement answered, and Mira said softly that hope is contagious, and Jiwoo nodded because he felt it in every heartbeat of his crew, and in every signal from the surface, and the galaxy watched in silence and unease because a species it had underestimated for so long was learning the truth about its own power. Not through weapons, not through domination, but through empathy, courage, and the unyielding choice to act. And the night stretched on, and the stars outside the ship twinkled faintly, and the human crew waited and watched and hoped, and the world below waited and watched and hoped, and in that waiting something began to change. Something that no law, no fleet, no tradition could stop, and the humans had arrived. Not as conquerors, but as witnesses to suffering, and as bearers of a truth. The galaxy had almost forgotten that to act for others is the greatest power one can possess. And Jiwoo felt the weight of that truth settle on his shoulders, and he smiled. Faintly, because even in this vast dark space filled with unknown dangers and unknown civilizations, there was something no one could take from humans, and that was their choice to do what was right, and the signal continued to flare faintly, and the people below moved carefully toward it, and the humans in orbit adjusted their course to meet them, and the story of first contact was not about fear or power or dominance, but about connection, trust, hope, and courage, and the galaxy would remember it not for the humans that arrived, but for the ones who chose to listen and act, and the humans in that cold, dark system felt, for the first time, the fragile warmth of true purpose, and the hours turned into days, and the settlement slowly revealed more of itself, and humans moved gently among the people on the ground, learning and teaching and sharing, and the coalition watched and calculated and failed to understand, and Jiwoo leaned on the bridge and whispered that, perhaps the galaxy will never be the same again, and Mira smiled faintly, because she felt the same. And Sejin and Doyoon shared quiet glances, knowing that the mission was only beginning, and in that moment, in the dark outer space, the human crew understood that they were part of something larger than themselves, something that had always been possible, and something that the universe had almost forgotten, and the connection between the humans and the settlement grew, and the story continued to unfold, and no one knew yet how far it would go or what consequences it would bring, but for now hope lived, and humanity had arrived, and the galaxy was beginning to realize that it could no longer ignore them. The humans had been in orbit above the settlement for days, and every day brought new sounds, new signals, and new glimpses of lives that had been hidden away from the galaxy for far too long. Captain Han Juwu watched quietly from the bridge of the ship as the crew prepared to take the next step toward helping those who had sent the distress call, and he could feel the tension and hope and fear all mingled together, like a storm pressing against his chest, and Myra Kong stood beside him, watching the scans of the settlement flicker on the screen. And she whispered that they were living in a fragile balance where every wrong move could be disaster, and Jiwoo nodded because he understood completely, but he also knew that waiting without action was no longer an option, and the humans below began to respond to the signals, the flashes of light, the careful gestures that told them that they were not alone, that help was coming, and Sejin and Lee Doyan worked tirelessly on the communication arrays, translating the faint signals from the surface and adapting their systems to be understandable to the people down there. And Jiwoo felt a surge of pride mixed with worry because every small success was like a candle against the dark sky of oppression, and the coalition had begun to notice the humans in their space, and warnings came through channels the humans barely understood, and Mira read them aloud. Taguin said that the coalition was demanding they leave, and he looked at her. He'd said that leaving was not an option, because the people down there had already chosen to trust them, and the decision weighed heavy on him because he knew that it could bring consequences no one could predict, but the thought of abandoning the settlement was heavier than fear itself, and the humans began to prepare a landing craft to descend to the planet. And it was a careful process, slow and deliberate, so as not to alarm the people below, and the crew practiced every maneuver over and over, checking every system and imagining every possible outcome, and Jiwoo walked among them, offering quiet words of encouragement, and Mira reminded him that courage was contagious, and sometimes the crew needed to hear it as much as the settlement did. And Sejin muttered that he had never felt anything like this before, that it was not a mission, not an exploration, not even duty. It was something deeper, and Jiwoo nodded because he felt it to something that tied them together with the people they were, about to meet something human, something essential. And the day of the descent arrived, and the humans in orbit adjusted their approach, carefully descending through the thick gray atmosphere of the settlement world, and the streets below were empty at first, but soon small figures began to appear, cautiously stepping out to watch the strange ship above them, and Jiwoo felt his heart tighten because he could see the fear and hope mirrored in their movements, and Mira whispered that they must show that they came in peace, that every gesture mattered. And Jiwoo agreed, and the landing was smooth, careful, gentle, and the humans inside held their breath. As the craft touched the ground and the doors opened, and a soft hum of welcome spread as carefully chosen signals and gestures reached the people below, and slowly figures approached, some hiding behind walls, some stepping into the open with curiosity. And the humans on the landing craft moved slowly and calmly, not reaching out too quickly, but making themselves seen, making themselves understandable, making themselves human to those who had almost forgotten that humans existed in this galaxy. And the first contact was quiet and hesitant, and Myra knelt on one knee, holding her hands out slowly, and a young figure came forward looking up with wide eyes, and Jiwoo felt a lump in his throat because he knew that this small act of trust was monumental, and the people began to respond in small ways, gestures, smiles, tears, and the humans listened and mirrored and communicated in the simplest way they could, and every interaction felt heavy with meaning. And Sejin reported that more signals were coming from the city, that others were watching, that hope was spreading through whispered networks, and Doyan analyzed the energy patterns of the machines that had been used to control the settlement, and he noted that they were old, inefficient, and desperate to maintain order. And Jiwoo thought about how fear had shaped these lives and how humans had the power to change that, not through violence, but through attention, presence, and care. And Mira said quietly that they were planting seeds. And Jiwoo smiled faintly because he knew she was right, that the seeds were small, but they could grow into forests, and the coalition vessels hovered at the edge of detection, monitoring the humans and calculating their motives. And Jiwoo knew that they underestimated the humans because they were looking for weapons, for conquest, for strategy, for numbers, and humans were showing something entirely different, something no one had expected: kindness, courage, and willingness to act without reward or fear. And the hours stretched into days, and every movement mattered, and humans on the surface began to venture out and communicate with each other through the humans in orbit, and the settlement slowly came alive in ways it had not for generations. And Jiwoo felt the weight of responsibility pressing against him, and Mira reminded him that this was the right path, and he nodded, because he could feel the hope growing stronger, and the humans taught the people how to communicate safely, how to send signals that could not be intercepted, how to organize small communities, and every lesson was small but significant, and the coalition continued to observe, and the humans noticed subtle patterns of hesitation and fear in the settlers, and they moved gently, not pushing, but guiding, not demanding, but offering, and slowly the people began to believe that the humans would not leave, that they would stay, that they had chosen to care. And Jiwoo watched a young boy reach for Mira's hand.
Why is she?
Let him touch it briefly, and the boy laughed softly, and the sound was like a bomb to every human in orbit, and Sejin said that this was what they had come for. Not victory, not accolades, not discovery, but this tiny spark of life. And Doyan nodded, because he could see it in every flicker of light, every hesitant movement, every quiet conversation, that hope was returning to the settlement, and the humans in orbit adjusted their plans to allow more direct contact, more support, more gentle guidance. And Jiwoo walked the surface and spoke softly to groups of people, offering encouragement stories of survival and laughter from Earth, and he felt the humanity in them return piece by piece, like sunlight breaking through clouds. And Myra observed, quietly noting every detail, every reaction, every sign of trust being earned, and Jin and Doyan moved between groups, teaching skills and repairing old machines, and showing that knowledge could be a gift, not a tool of oppression. And as days passed, the coalition realized that their assumptions were wrong, that humans were not predictable, not controllable, not motivated by dominance, and Jiwoo felt a strange mix of pride and worry, because he knew that misunderstanding could either protect them or bring danger, and the settlement began to organize itself in small ways, the people forming councils, sharing resources and helping each other, and the humans simply supported them, gently, carefully, offering advice and guidance without taking control. And the young boy returned every day and learned new skills and laughed with Sejin, and the sound of that laughter echoed in the hearts of the humans, and Jiwoo felt a warmth he had not expected, because even in this vast cold galaxy, connection could thrive if nurtured with patience and care. And Mira said that what they were doing was changing everything, and Jiwoo nodded because he knew she was right, that small actions could ripple across stars, and the coalition fleet remained at a distance, confused, calculating, and failing to grasp the human approach. And Jiwoo watched the stars outside and felt that same quiet power that had brought humanity through centuries of survival, that humans did not need to conquer to be strong. They needed only to act with courage and empathy, and the settlement grew stronger every day, the people daring to hope, daring to trust, and humans on the ship and on the ground shared quiet moments of joy and relief, and they learned each other's stories and histories, and laughed and cried together, and Jiwoo felt tears sting his eyes, because he realized that hope was alive and tangible, and that the human choice to act without expectation was already in shaping the galaxy in ways that would take decades to understand. And Myra knelt beside a small group, teaching them simple words, gestures, and the people responded with smiles and questions, and slowly the fear began to melt, and the human crew felt themselves part of a living story, one that would echo long after they had left the planet. And Sejin repaired an old water system, and Juan adapted communication tools for long-distance signaling, and every action was small but significant, and Jiwoo walked among them and listened to their voices and stories, and knew that for the first time in centuries, someone had come who would listen, who would act, who would not turn away. And the coalition watched and analyzed, and found no threat according to their calculations, but humans were not about calculations, they were about choice, about courage, about empathy. And Jiwoo felt a quiet pride that humans had arrived, were showing what they could be. And Mira said softly that they are learning to trust again, and Jiwoo nodded, because he felt it too, that fragile trust that could grow into strength, that could change everything. and every night the humans on the ship and on the ground shared stories of Earth of lives lived with struggle and love, and the settlers began to see themselves differently, not as prisoners, but as people capable of making choices, and the humans offered guidance, but never took control, and slowly the streets became filled with cautious laughter, cautious chatter, and cautious hope, and the young boy waved to Sajin and Doyan and Mira and Jiwoo, and every wave carried meaning, every smile carried trust, and the coalition fleet began to recognize that humans could not be ignored, but they still could not understand them. And Jiwoo watched the stars and thought of the lives restored, the hope rekindled, the trust earned, and he felt the quiet power of humanity spreading without weapons, without force, simply through care, courage, and presence. And Myra whispered that they are showing the galaxy what humans truly are, and Jiwoo nodded because he could feel it in every heartbeat around him, and the humans continued to move carefully through the settlement, guiding, teaching, listening, and learning, and slowly the small community began to flourish in ways the galaxy had not seen before, and every day brought new challenges, new small victories, and every night the humans reflected quietly on the work they had done, the lives they had touched, and the connections they had formed, and Jiwoo felt a calm strength settle over him, because he knew that this was the path of humanity, a path of empathy, courage, and unyielding action for the sake of others, and the galaxy would take notice, not because humans sought power, but because they had chosen to act when action was needed, and the settlement glowed softly with the first sparks of life, not ruled by fear, but guided by hope, and the humans had become part of something larger than themselves, and something the galaxy had almost forgotten, the simple truth that when someone cries for help, someone answers, and in that choice humanity found its power and its place, and the days continued to pass with small gestures growing into understanding, trust growing into hope, and the humans in orbit and on the ground felt for the first time the quiet warmth of connection and purpose, and the story of humanity in this small corner of the galaxy was just beginning, and every choice, every gentle action, every smile, every careful word was part of the change, and Jiwoo knew in his heart that nothing would ever be the same again, because humans had arrived, and they had shown what it truly meant to act with courage and care, and the galaxy could not ignore them. Humans had been on the settlement world for weeks, and every day brought new signs of life and trust and hope, and yet the galaxy beyond watched and waited and calculated and underestimated, and Captain Han Jiwoo stood on the bridge of the ship as the stars stretched endlessly before him, and he could feel the weight of unseen eyes pressing from afar, and Mira Kong leaned beside him, her eyes scanning the data streams, and she said softly that the coalition was beginning to notice that humans acted differently, that humans did not seek conquest or control, that humans acted out of choice and courage, and Jiwoo nodded, because he knew that was true, and it was that difference that made them unpredictable, that made them strong, that made them dangerous to powers that had grown used to fear and obedience. And Sejin worked quietly, adjusting the long-range sensors to pick up every movement from distant vessels, and Lee Doyan analyzed energy patterns, looking for any sign of strategy or hostility, and Jiwoo felt a strange mix of pride and concern, because he knew that misunderstanding could both protect and endanger them, and the humans on the surface continued their careful work, teaching small communities how to communicate, how to care for each other, how to rebuild in ways that the galaxy had long forgotten. And every gesture, every careful word, every signal sent to the settlement was a small act of courage and connection, and the coalition vessels lingered at the edge of detection, trying to understand why humans had come so far into their space, and why they were not following rules or retreating, or demanding anything in return. And Jiwoo thought about Earth and the history of humans, underestimated again and again, and survived again and again, because they listened to instincts and values that others dismissed as foolish, and now those instincts had led them to this far corner of the galaxy, and the humans below were beginning to show signs of life and energy and hope that had been hidden for generations. And Jiwoo watched as a group of children played carefully among adults, teaching them gestures and signals that the humans had brought, and Mira whispered that this was courage in its purest form, acting without expectation, and he nodded because he could feel the impact of every small movement rippling outward across the settlement. And the coalition had begun to react. They sent ships closer, sending signals, demanding retreat and compliance, but the humans did not retreat. They acted with patience, with understanding, with empathy. They moved gently, not aggressively, but with a presence that could not be ignored, and Jiwoo felt the weight of that presence settling in his chest, because he understood that the galaxy had not seen humans act like this before, and they could not predict it. And Sejin reported that the coalition vessels were scanning the settlement looking for threats and anomalies, and Doyon said that they would find none because humans did not bring weapons to threaten. They brought courage and choice, and Jiwoo watched the people on the ground begin to organize themselves, forming councils, small groups, sharing resources, learning to rely on each other, and the humans guided them gently, offering advice when asked, teaching when needed, and standing back when necessary. And Mira whispered that this was the hardest kind of leadership because it required restraint, and Jiwoo nodded because he had felt it every day since arriving, the balance between acting and observing the settlement, learning to trust without forcing trust. And slowly the coalition vessels began to hesitate as they could not interpret human motives. They could not calculate the unpredictable courage of a species acting for others without reward, and Jiwoo felt a quiet pride, and also a deep responsibility, because they had crossed a line the galaxy had expected humans to avoid, and now that line had been crossed. There was no turning back. And on the settlement, the humans had begun to repair old machines, to provide clean water, to organize food distribution, to teach the people how to communicate safely across the city. And every action was small, but it carried weight because it built trust, hope, and resilience. And Jiwoo walked the streets, observing every interaction, learning the stories of the people, listening to their fears and hopes, and he could feel their humanity returning piece by piece as they realized someone had come who would not exploit them, would not abandon them, who would act simply because it was right. And Mira stood beside groups of children, teaching simple gestures and signs, and the children laughed and moved cautiously toward her. And the adults watched and slowly began to step forward, and the coalition observed and calculated and found nothing threatening in human actions, but they were unsettled because they could not understand that humans did not need to intimidate to act, that courage could be gentle, that power could be measured in empathy and choice. And Jiwoo felt a quiet warmth every time he saw a small victory, every time a group of people learned to work together without fear. And Sajin and Doyon continued to adapt technology to help the people communicate and understand each other, and every improvement brought small smiles, small laughter, small relief, and the humans on the landing craft and the ship above were becoming a steady presence that the people relied on and trusted. And Jiwoo realized that the galaxy had almost forgotten this type of strength, the strength to act without expectation, to help without fear, to stand firm without using force. And Mira whispered that the coalition may begin to underestimate humans again, but this time it would not matter, because humans had already planted seeds of hope that could not be erased. And the humans continued their work with patience and care, moving gently among the people, teaching, listening, observing, and guiding, without taking control. And slowly the settlement began to flourish in ways it had never known, people helping each other, learning skills, laughing cautiously, and hoping quietly. And Jiwoo walked among them, feeling the same hope and pride and responsibility. And he remembered nights on Earth when humans had acted out of compassion and courage, and he realized that this was the same courage magnified across light years. And the coalition vessels above remained at a distance, trying to calculate the humans' actions and failing to understand, because humans did not act predictably, because humans acted for choice and justice. And Jiwoo felt a mixture of relief and tension, because he knew the galaxy could be dangerous if miscalculations happened, but he also knew that retreat was not an option, because humanity could not abandon hope once it had reached out. And on the settlement, the people began to speak to each other, openly sharing fears, stories, and plans, and slowly learning that they had power in numbers, in communication, in trust. And the humans supported them, gently offering guidance and teaching skills without taking control. and Mira whispered that this is the moment when courage spreads like light, and Jiwoo nodded, because he could feel it in every heartbeat around him, and Sejin and Doyeon moved among groups teaching them how to repair machinery, how to communicate signals safely, how to organize small communities, and the people listened because they could feel that these humans acted out of care, not exploitation, and slowly the fear that had ruled them for generations began to fade, and the humans in orbit adjusted systems to allow better communication, better observation, better guidance, and the coalition vessels hovered uncertain, watching humans act in ways no calculations could predict, and Jiwoo felt a strange calm because he knew that for all the danger, all the risk, all the tension, this was the correct path, the path of action, courage, and empathy, and the humans in orbit and on the ground began to connect in quiet networks, sharing stories, lessons, and laughter, and slowly the settlement came alive with cautious hope and cautious energy, and every day brought new small victories, new small moments of trust and connection, and Jiwoo watched children learning simple tasks guided by Sejin, adults repairing water systems guided by Doyeon, groups sharing food guided by Mira, and all of it under the quiet, watchful eyes of humans who would never abandon them, and the coalition calculated endlessly, trying to understand, and failed because the humans' motives were simple: to act because it was right, because it mattered, because hope mattered more than fear. And Jiwoo stood on the bridge looking at the stars, and he realized that humanity had become more than just explorers, observers, or rescuers. They had become a force the galaxy could not ignore, not because of weapons, not because of numbers, but because of courage, empathy, and unyielding. Aksha and Mira said softly that they have begun to change the galaxy, and Jiwoo nodded because he could feel it in the growing life, the growing hope, the growing courage of the people on the settlement, and every night they gathered to share stories, teach skills, celebrate small victories, and plan for the days ahead, and the humans were not taking control. They were nurturing resilience and trust, and slowly the coalition began to hesitate, seeing humans act in ways that were impossible to quantify or suppress, and Jiwoo felt the weight of every choice, every gesture, every lesson, every act of courage pressing against his chest, and he knew that the galaxy would remember. This because humans had arrived not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as witnesses and bearers of hope and courage and choice, and the settlement glowed softly with life as humans worked alongside the people, teaching, guiding, and acting. And slowly, the once silent streets were filled with movement and quiet laughter, and quiet conversation, and quiet trust, and Jiwoo walked among them, listening to their stories, feeling their humanity return, and he understood that the greatest weapon humans possessed was not technology, it was the willingness to act when action was needed, without expectation, without fear. And Mira whispered that courage is contagious, and Jiwoo nodded because he could feel it spreading from the humans in orbit to the humans on the ground, to the settlement itself, and the coalition watched and calculated and waited and failed to understand that humans had created something that no calculations could predict, a network of hope and courage that could not be destroyed by fear. And the humans on the ground and in orbit continued their work, moving carefully, teaching carefully, listening, carefully guiding, carefully, and slowly the settlement transformed from a place of silence, fear, and oppression into a place of life, energy, and cautious hope. In every small action, every small gesture, every small lesson carried weight and built trust and strengthened courage and work. Jiwoo felt a quiet calm because he knew that humanity had shown what it could be, and that the galaxy could not forget it, and the stars
outside
twinkled faintly, as if watching the quiet miracle of choice, courage, and empathy unfold. And the humans continued their work with patience, care, and unyielding resolve. And slowly but surely the galaxy began to feel the presence of humanity, not as conquerors, but as bearers of hope and choice. And the settlement glowed softly at night with light and laughter and courage, and every day the humans in orbit and on the ground strengthened the fragile network of trust that could change the galaxy forever. And Jiwoo stood quietly watching, feeling pride, hope, and quiet awe at the simple power of humans acting for the sake of others, and Mira whispered that they are rewriting what it means to be powerful, and Jiwoo nodded because he knew she was right, and the story of humanity and the settlement continued unfolding. Quietly, gently, but with unstoppable determination, and the galaxy would never be the same. Because humans had arrived and chosen to act, the galaxy had begun to change, and the humans had become a presence that could not be ignored, and Captain Han Jiwoo stood on the bridge of the ship, watching the stars stretch endlessly before him, and he felt the weight of every choice, every gesture, every small act of courage pressing against his chest, and Myra Kong stood beside him, quiet, calm, steady, and she said softly that the galaxy is watching them now. And Jiwoo nodded because he knew she was right, and it was true in ways the coalition could not understand, because humans acted not for power, not for control, but because it was right. And Sejin adjusted the long-range sensors to catch every movement, every communication, every ripple in the energy fields across the system, and Lee Doyan analyzed patterns, looking for signs of interference or calculation, but there were none, because humans did not calculate for fear or advantage. They calculated for help and connection, and the settlement below had begun to breathe with life, energy, hope, and trust in the humans on the surface moved gently, teaching, guiding, listening, learning, sharing, without ever forcing, and the people began to organize themselves, sharing resources, caring for each other, building a community that had almost been forgotten, and Jiwoo walked among them, feeling the same hope and pride and quiet weight of responsibility, because he knew that every small gesture could ripple across the stars and change everything. And Mira whispered that courage is quiet and steady, and Jiwoo nodded because he could feel it spreading from the humans in orbit to the humans on the ground to the settlement itself, and the coalition ships lingered at the edge of detection, scanning and calculating, and still failing to understand that humans had created something that could not be measured, a force not of weapons or numbers, but of empathy, choice, and courage. And Jiwoo thought of Earth and the lessons humanity had learned through centuries of struggle and survival, underestimated again and again, yet always rising, and he realized that the same lessons had brought them here, to this small settlement far from home, and the people on the surface began to trust them cautiously, at first hiding and peeking and listening, and then moving closer and engaging, learning and sharing, and the humans responded, carefully, patiently, offering gestures, guidance, teaching, and support without ever taking control, and slowly the community grew stronger, more confident, more alive, and every small success brought laughter, smiles, relief, and courage that spread like sunlight through the streets and the coalition. Ships hesitated and recalculated, and the humans on the ship and the ground felt a quiet satisfaction knowing that their actions were seen, even if misunderstood. And Jiwoo watched a group of children gather around Mira, learning simple words, gestures, and signals, and he felt a warmth in his chest that surprised him, because even in the cold, dark vastness of space, connection could thrive and grow, and every day the humans in orbit adjusted systems to improve communication with the settlement, sharing signals, teaching safe ways to connect, learning the patterns of life. And Mira whispered that humanity is teaching the galaxy a lesson it is almost forgotten, and Jiwoo nodded because he could feel it in every heartbeat around him, in every cautious smile, in every small act of trust and kindness. And Sejin worked among groups, showing them how to repair old machines, how to organize resources, how to work together, and Dion adapted communication tools to allow more voices to speak, and every action was small but meaningful. Every moment built hope and resilience, and slowly the streets of the settlement began to fill with cautious chatter, movement, and laughter, and the humans on the surface and in orbit became a constant, steady presence that people relied on, trusted, and believed in. And Jiwoo felt the quiet miracle of it in his chest, because for the first time in generations, people had someone who would not abandon them, someone who would act because it was right. And Mira said softly that the coalition may try to suppress fear, may try to regain control, but the humans have already changed the balance. And Jiwoo nodded because he knew she was right. that one act of courage can ripple across systems and generations and the humans. Continued their work, moving carefully among the people teaching, listening, guiding, and learning, and the coalition vessels hesitated, and watched and calculated, and failed to see that humans had begun to shape the galaxy. It's not with weapons, but with courage, empathy, and choice, and the people on the settlement began to reach out to each other, helping, teaching, supporting quietly, building a network of trust and resilience that could not be undone by fear. And Jiwoo walked among them, feeling the quiet power of every smile, every gesture, every act of trust, and he realized that humanity had become more than explorers or rescuers. They had become a force that the galaxy could not ignore, a presence defined by action and care. And Mira watched groups of children learning from Seijin, learning from Doyon, learning from her, and the laughter and voices carried through the streets. And the adults began to teach and guide each other, and slowly the settlement became a living community, learning to trust, hope, and care again, and the coalition vessels above adjusted positions, hesitated, calculated, and still could not grasp the human approach, because humans did not act predictably. Humans acted with courage, empathy, and unyielding choice, and Jiwoo stood quietly watching the stars, feeling the presence of hope that stretched from the settlement to the ship to the stars themselves, and Mira whispered that every act matters, every gesture ripples across the galaxy, and Jiwoo nodded because he could feel it spreading, not in fear or force, but in quiet courage and care, and the humans continued to move among the people, teaching, sharing, guiding, learning, building a network of connection and resilience, and slowly the settlement glowed softly with life, laughter, hope, and trust. And every night the humans gathered to share stories, teach skills, celebrate small victories, and plan for the days ahead, and the people joined them, learning and sharing and acting together, and Gui felt a quiet pride because they were building something larger than themselves, something the galaxy had almost forgotten, that the greatest strength comes not from weapons or fleets, but from empathy, courage, and the choice to act. And Mira whispered that the galaxy will remember this, and Jiwoo nodded because he knew she was right, and every day the humans in orbit and on the surface strengthened the fragile network of hope, trust, and courage, and the coalition vessels above watched, unable to understand why humans acted as they did, and Jiwoo felt a quiet, calm knowing that the humans had already changed the perception of their species across the galaxy, not through violence, not through domination, but through care, courage, and action, and the settlement continued to grow more alive, more connected, more confident, and the humans in orbit adjusted systems to support them, improve communication, and offer guidance without ever controlling or forcing. And Sagan and Doyon moved among the people, teaching skills, helping repair systems, sharing knowledge, and every small action built courage, trust, and hope. And slowly the community flourished, and the humans continued to act gently and carefully, supporting, guiding, teaching, while respecting the choices of the people. And Jiwoo watched children learning skills, laughing, playing cautiously under the watchful eyes of humans who acted with patience and care, and the adults shared knowledge, guidance, and support, and the settlement grew stronger and more resilient, and every gesture carried weight and built trust. And slowly the coalition vessels began to see that humans were not a threat in the traditional sense, but a force the galaxy could not measure or control, and Jiwoo felt pride and responsibility pressing together in his chest, because he knew the galaxy would never be the same. And Mira whispered that humans are teaching the universe what it means to act without expectation, and Jiwoo nodded because he could feel it in every heartbeat around him, every smile, every cautious laugh, every small act of courage. And the humans continued their work, moving gently among the people, teaching, listening, guiding, and learning, and the settlement glowed softly with life, hope, and trust. And every day the humans in orbit and on the ground strengthened the fragile network of connection and resilience, and slowly the galaxy began to feel the presence of humanity, not as conquerors, but as bearers of hope and choice. And Jiwoo walked quietly among the people, listening to their stories, learning their history, understanding their fear and hope, and he realized that humanity had shown its true power not through dominance, but through action, choice, courage, and care, and Miro whispered softly that the galaxy will remember this. And Jiwoo nodded, because he could feel it in the quiet strength of the people in the settlement, in the steady presence of the humans in orbit and on the surface, and the stars stretched endlessly outside as if witnessing the quiet miracle of hope. An action unfolding, and the humans continued their work, moving carefully, teaching, guiding, listening, and learning. And slowly, the settlement transformed from a place of fear, silence, and oppression into a place of life, energy, hope, and trust. And every small action, every small gesture, every lesson carried weight and built trust, strengthened courage, and rippled through the galaxy. And Jiwoo felt the quiet power of humanity in every heartbeat around him, every small smile, every cautious step. And he understood that the greatest weapon humans possessed was not technology, but the willingness to act when action was needed, without expectation, without fear. And Miro whispered that courage is contagious, and Jiwoo nodded because he could feel it spreading through orbit and surface and settlement, and the galaxy would never be the same because humans had arrived and chosen to act.